So today we're going to start talking about the Middle Ages, and we just finished the fall of Rome, so we're going to talk about how that turned Eastern and Western Rome, that part of Europe, into a thriving part and a falling part. So you're going to need your notes. They look like this right here, okay? I believe they're on Google Classroom. They're all filled in, but I'm going to want you to maybe open them with Cami and follow along and highlight as we go through. I will come back to this at the end and we can go through and highlight, but I also want to make sure that you get the PowerPoint. So let me open that up. And then I think it should be there. So we have the power and politics of the Middle Ages. So looking at this, we have Western Europe on this side. This is Eastern Europe. It became the Byzantine Empire. Here we have the Abbasid Caliphate that we're going to talk about, and that is the Muslim empire that took over between, here's India, and then our northern tip of Africa here. And then we're also going to spend some time talking about the Tang and the Song dynasty, and then Japan over here. Japan is always its own little place. So we're going to talk about them just a little bit. We're also going to talk about how the Mongols came through and like a blazing fire and came in hot and heavy and took over a whole bunch of area and then kind of fizzled out. So if you stay on our timeline, we have the European Middle Ages. Now this whole time describes the Middle Ages, but what we have here are the Dark Ages. Now we talked about the Golden Age of Rome, and we talked about the Golden Ages in India and in China. So Golden Age meant good times. Things were great, things were prosperous. So the Dark Ages obviously means the opposite of that. We are going to talk about the Crusades a little bit at the end of this, and then the Renaissance. So just take a look at this timeline, put things into perspective of where we are. All right, so we're going to break this down. Here's our Western and Eastern Europe. Eastern Empire is the Byzantine Empire. After Rome fell, it was split because it was too big, and the western half fell into the Dark Ages because all they have here is the Mediterranean Sea, and those people from Africa, the Carthaginians, are trying constantly to take over this trade here in the Mediterranean. Over here in the Byzantine Empire, they're going to start to control trade all the way to Asia, the Silk Road. So trade means money, money means power. So following the fall of Rome, divergent societies emerged in Europe. Divergent means different. So you're going to notice that over here in the Western Empire, we've got people coming in from the north, we've got people coming in from the south, we've got all these people trying to get some sort of stronghold of this area and take control. Over here, we're still pretty steady. Justinian is the emperor. He and the church are working together to maintain this empire. So the Dark Ages happened in the West. There was no centralized government. They used feudalism. We're going to talk about that. They were very poor, and the Roman Catholic Church was in charge. On the eastern side, because the church and Emperor Justinian were working together, it wasn't called the Catholic Church, it was the Eastern Orthodox Church, but they just continued the greatness of the Roman Empire, whereas over here we talked about when Rome fell, the bones of the city, the infrastructure were falling apart. So all they really had was just shambles. They didn't have much, and they didn't have trade because all the trade was over here. Okay. Western Europe took on the type of government called feudalism, where it's locally run, it's by land ownership, self-sufficient manners, lords were the leaders, the lawmakers. On the political side of Byzantine Empire, we have Justinian, who is an emperor, and he changed the 12 tables of Rome into Justinian's code and just kind of kept things pretty similar. Socially, in the Dark Ages in Western Europe, the feudal kingdoms Everyone belonged to a social class. They were ranked according to that class. There was definitely a higher, upper, lower, middle, all that good stuff. And the church was super, super, super important because the church had all the money. The church had all the power. So people looked to the church to help them survive. Whereas in Eastern Europe, the church and the empire worked together, so much so that even Justinian and Theodora, his wife, they rebuilt the city of Constantinople and then built this huge cathedral in it called the Hagia Sophia, big church. Economically, Western Europe, using feudalism, was divided into numerous locally run manors. So almost like little towns, and each town had everything it needed to be self-sufficient. Self-sufficient means everything it needs to survive. So the manor was self-sufficient. It had the Lord's home, which you see is the big manor house here, and then there were fields and forests and the village church and the peasants' homes. So basically, because there was so much danger during this time of barbarian attacks and invasions still happening, people who didn't have land and power needed protection. So what they would say is they would go here to the manor and they would say, may I live here on your land, on your manor, and I will help tend your crops and your fields in return for protection. So that's kind of how that worked, okay? So it was production for protection. It was kind of a way that they worked things out. They didn't have to do that in Eastern Europe, though, because they absolutely had control of all of the trade between Europe and Asia, okay? So they're doing really awesome on that side. All right, now, up here is Europe, okay? And we have, you know, over here, we're in the dark ages of Western Europe, and here's Eastern Europe, and this is the Byzantine, here's Constantinople. Down here, this is all the Abbasid Caliphate. Okay, so this is the Muslim Empire, all right? I want to just make sure that we can see where we're at. This is the tip of Africa, the top, okay? And here we are, the Middle East and all that good stuff. Okay, India's over here. So Middle East, right here. They used military expansion and trade to expand their empire fast. They also tended to treat people with respect, especially if they converted to Islam. So they were, you know, that's just, I want you to keep that in mind. This is what's happening down here while we're doing all of this up here, okay? The Byzantine Empire, we talked about that, but here it all is. This is the Byzantine Empire under Justinian, okay, Rome. Here we are, here's the capital, Constantinople. It originated out of the eastern half of the old Roman Empire. Constantinople stayed the capital, and basically it was all about the location. If this had been on the other side, had been to the west, it would have fallen in the Dark Ages, okay? It really is just a matter of where it was located. And then also, as it spread, they were able to move some trade north to Russia, and they really helped Russia get into some alphabet, artwork, architecture. They spread Christianity to Russia, those kinds of things. And we are not going to talk about the Mongol Empire yet. What I want to do now is go through our packet with you, and we are going to discuss what you need to highlight in your notes. All right, so it is important to see these maps and to note the context of things, okay? So this is Africa, here is India, this little area right here is Western and Eastern Europe, okay? Western Europe and Eastern Europe, the Byzantine Empire. Here's the Abbasid Caliphate, here's Asia, we're gonna come to that. And then again, remember we talked about this whole area of Mongolia. They're gonna swoop in, big bang, fizzle out, moving on, okay? Looking at the timeline, I think it's just important to put things in context. So 476 AD, or Common Era, is when Rome fell. And then immediately, here we have the Middle Ages. Western Europe falls into the Dark Ages for 300 years. Finally, feudalism comes to play, and they figure out how to pull themselves out of those Dark Ages. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire is thriving for a long, 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 long time, okay? Notice also how short the Mongol Empire was. So let's look at some things, and I want you to highlight the important stuff. So we have the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine, okay? It was caused by the fall of the Roman Empire. It was considered the Dark Ages. At first, they had no centralized government. They used feudalism instead. They were poor and Roman Catholic Church. On this side, were caused by the fall of the Roman Empire again, continued the greatness of the Roman Empire. So these people had the culture and the trade and the wealth of the Roman Empire. Well, these people had Rome. We know Rome was falling apart anyway. So that's something to keep in mind. Constantinople was the capital of Rome. That's right here, or of the Byzantine Empire, not Rome, sorry. They were wealthy from trade because all of this over here is the Silk Road, okay? And because Justinian, the emperor, and the church worked together, that became known as the Eastern Orthodox Church. Okay. So, a little more example of feudalism. Feudalism is a type of government that is locally run based on land ownership. And we have learned that land equals money and money equals power. Lords were the leaders, lawmakers, and judges. Politically, in Eastern Europe, Justinian was an emperor, and he worked together with the church to continue the greatness of the Roman Empire, but he redid those laws and made it Justinian's code. Socially, in Western Europe, everyone was in a social class. Don't forget we have the triangle, the ranks of people. Kings, nobles, peasants, serfs, okay? Everyone is ranked. The church was incredibly important to people's daily lives because they didn't know any better. Over here in Eastern Europe, the church and the emperor worked together, okay? So it wasn't necessarily all of the church. The Greek language became the official language instead of Latin, and they built the huge Hagia Sophia. So the church and the government worked together. Down here we have that manner is self-sufficient. And we have that it's a system that ensures that everyone got what they needed, which we know is the definition of economy, right? Economic economy, how people get what they need. How did they get what they needed in Eastern Europe? They traded, okay? Looking at the Abbasid Caliphate, now if you're able, I know this picture isn't great, but from that picture we had on our notes, you're gonna wanna look here and kind of sort that out. Up here is Europe, down here is the Abbasid Caliphate. They expanded and maintained control and sometimes disrupted state building in other regions. So do you think all of this going on down here is somehow going to disrupt everything that's going on up here? Probably, because once we expand, we continue, right? So they used military expansion and trade. Muslim rule expanded rapidly because they were mostly respectful of the people that they conquered. So they didn't get a lot of pushback, okay? And down here in the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, we know, said again, remains the capital. But the big deal is the location of the empire helped it to control trade between Europe and Asia. Bottom line, location, location, location. Why did Western Europe fall? It's location. Okay, and then we're gonna stop here and we'll talk about the Mongols. And your homework is the Intro to the Middle Ages Nearpod. And I hope I see you soon. Thanks.